Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have a really cool comparison for you guys today from WM Watch, or Wrist Moment, recently rebranded from Welly Merck. They're an Asian OEM / ODM, original design equipment, or original design manufacturer, producer, turned factory brand. In terms of type of watch, this is a very cool little traveler's watch. Some key characteristics and design language. You're looking for something within the space. Of course, you want to find either a GMT or world timer functionality so that you're able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. This is their GMT watch, the WM193, and it is an homage to the $5,800 Grand Seiko Sports SBGM245 automatic GMT that I actually own. So once I saw this was kind of within their catalog, I've been pining to compare it just because of the outrageous pricing, guys. I mean, the full price on this is only $265, and the current sale price is $143.55, so like under $150. So this was kindly sent in free of charge by WM Watch. I don't know if they even realized that I already had the actual Grand Seiko to compare it to, but I thought, why not? It would make for a really fun segment, especially just considering that, I mean, they're completely different markets and everything like that. There are going to be some drastic differences, but at the same time, there are going to be some things that they're going to, try to pull off here that are quite ambitious for a watch within this price point. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so let's get these close here. I'll say that the WM does a good job with its, it's obviously not a one-to-one here, but it is very close in terms of its aesthetic. They definitely got a lot of the details and tried to get them in there. They're not finished to as high a level. Let's, do some general housekeeping here, guys. This watch here, this WM is going to be, I would say probably spec wise, it's higher than something like a Seiko 5, but in terms of execution, it's going to be probably a little bit underneath a Seiko 5, but that's not anything to sneeze at, considering that a Seiko 5 will typically be really highly finished for the price point. So that's something I do want to get out of the way. Of course, it's not going to be some luxury level of a build like you would get with this beautiful Grand Seiko here. My goodness. I mean, even though this one's been worn and even has a couple of battle scars to it, you can still kind of, probably just by looking at these, see that there's a bit of a difference, even just to the naked eye, for those of you that are more keen in terms of the differences when you look at things like the end links or the links themselves, and even the case profiles, and even just the depth of the dials and the execution. I mean, even just like the sunray pattern versus the other sunray pattern. And there's a little bit of tonality that's different here, a bit of a brighter, more vibrance, and then here more subdued, but, definitely feels a bit richer and more luxurious at the same time. But let's get into the dimensions here. So we have a 40.5 millimeter diameter with a 12.2 millimeter thickness and a 48 millimeter lug to lug. So not too bad at all. You're getting a flat sapphire. You're getting a push-pull crown, unfortunately, not a screw-down crown, but this does say that it is water resistant to 20 atmospheres. That's not the first push-pull crown that somebody's advertised as being water resistant up to 200 meters. It's just one of those things where, as long as, of course, the crown is engaged and pushed in, that means that the seals will be engaged and pushed in. You just can't guarantee it. So, they could have easily said it was only 100 meters or something else. The fact that they still went with 200 tells me that they did a fair amount of water protection when they were making this. So you do have a fixed bezel, and it's very similar in terms of mirroring, that you have the even numbers there engraved, and then the odd numbers on that 24-hour chapter ring that is sloped inside, with also a kind of AM PM indicator where you have the light and then the dark colors, which is great, and it definitely mirrors that of the Grand Seiko. So there's, in terms of the design beats, they definitely hit a lot of those. Of course, there's going to be some differences in things like the movement, the regulation of the movement here, having a 4 hertz sweep there on that seconds hand, beautifully smooth. Here, having a 3 hertz sweep, just a little bit jerkier, but I mean, if you didn't have it side by side to compare, you might not be able to really notice. Honestly, if you didn't have this to compare side by side, I think this is still quite an impressive watch. Again, more comparable to something like a Seiko 5, but it's going to have a little bit of a higher spec with just a little bit of a lower floor in terms of the execution on certain components on there. But definitely, I think they do a good job in terms of recreating that. I mean, some differences you can see here. The side sculpting on the case, it's a little bit more angular here. It feels like it's a little bit flatter, more standard in terms of there being just a bit of a kind of a straighter line coming up and down here, versus on this, you can see it's more of an inner kind of angular cut there with the sculpting and the roundness. But they still did get, you know, they got some bevels in there. There's bevels, obviously, so they matched those. Not, of course, to the same degree in terms of quality, but they're still there. And, you know, they got that. The crown is at the right place. The date window's at the same place. It is also framed at that. When you look at the hand details, yeah, they're missing the hand stack cap that you get on the Grand Seiko, but they did get the shaping right of the hands, and they even did, look at that multifaceted, multi-finished handset. They're not, of course, to this level, right? But still, I mean, so this $150 watch, that's wild. Even the complexity of these markers, look at this. Of course, you know, they could have easily said, this is going to be really tough. Like, do you see the way that the Lume is integrated into the marker itself there at the 12 o'clock? That shape, that is not easy. And they still went ahead and they went for it. Of course, it's going to be a much more simpler and basic finish there, just being highly polished, versus here you're actually going to have a lot of micro finishing there to make it capture the light in certain ways. But again, I'm not thinking somebody's going to be like, oh, I'm going to buy this watch, let me just get this one instead. Like, that's not the case at all. Honestly, there's somebody who's going to like a watch like this, but say, hey, I don't want to spend that much on a timepiece, you know, or I don't want to spend that much on a Grand Seiko or a Seiko. So let me spend something like this, get a similar aesthetic. And the thing that I like about this, I mean, of course, that I like about this design in general, is that it has a very, the design aesthetic, the beauty that I find in it is that, yes, it does recall certain aesthetics that you might find on something like a Rolex Explorer 2, but it looks completely different. Like, everything is different about this. It just has a fixed 24-hour bezel, but everything else is like distinctly Grand Seiko. And if it's not distinctly Grand Seiko, it's distinctly Seiko when it comes to things like the 4 o'clock crown, and then the level of robustness there, you know, screw down crown, 200 meters of water resistance, you know, and a really beautifully done luxury timepiece. You know, I just, for me, that was quite irresistible. But hey, if I was earlier on in my journey, something like this could be very compelling, just to let me know, like, hey, how much would I wear this watch, right? If I can kind of have a certain facsimile to it where it's very similar in terms of the sizing, in terms of the style, is this something that I would really wear? And I think, yeah, and for some people, they're going to say, oh, I could always get the quartz version, you know, but then you're spending a couple of grand for quartz versus, you know, less than a couple of hundred, right? Just a single $143, you can have something like this. So yeah, it's just pretty wild to me. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this is quite a full wearing watch, similar to the Grand Seiko. It is a full sports watch, really has a lot of bold presence. This is not meant to be some vintage inspired mid-size piece, and I think it wears really well without feeling oversized. As you guys can see, beautifully contoured, and using those secrets that Seiko has to really cut down the visual weight, although it is quite hefty thanks to its mechanical movement and solid construction. Whereas here, it's actually going to be slightly thinner when we get to the tail of the tape. So you are going to have a little bit less mass because it's a you know, the movement itself is going to be a little bit smaller. And they were able to kind of keep that nice and flat. And they even worked in something that the Grand Seiko doesn't have, which is a display case back. So kind of cool there. The Grand Seiko, of course, has a solid case back, which is very nice in terms of its execution and everything. But yeah, some people like to have a display case back, especially at this price point. That's a lot of fun. Another nice feature that they worked in here is they have actually fully articulated links. So here you're going to see that each link, so there's a 3-link setup, right? But the links themselves are actually fully articulated. So you could stack that if you needed to. That's just going to give you a little bit of more of mobility. Also, this does have a split pin construction, you know, which is going to be much cheaper, but it does have a milled folding section there, milled clasp, push button, nicely signed, and you are going to get some manual micro adjustment. You're getting fully milled here, manual micro adjustment, but the links here, although they are a 3-link setup, they're not fully articulated. They're more in the traditional kind of oyster style where 3 links are all kind of pinned together. So it's not going to be quite as articulate, but you do get half links there versus here, you're not getting any half links, but you don't necessarily need them because you can see the way that they did these sizing here, they actually shrunk down the length to where they're just slightly shorter, versus here you're having more of a full size, and then you have a half link option, and then of course you have multiple spaces there in terms of micro adjustment. So this thing, I gotta say, I was expecting to go into this and especially, you know, considering the other WM watches I've reviewed, they've all kind of fallen short, unfortunately. I mean, they take some really great designs and they really, you know, they do have to peel away a lot to get it to those price points. But I have to say, this one, I mean, this one's QC is good. Like it's just, obviously it's not a luxury watch. It's not done to a luxury level of execution, but like this one hits. Like this one really is firing on all cylinders. This is a really good showing for WM in terms of really showcasing what they're able to do. Of course, if I get my wrist too close to the camera lens, it just makes the watches look larger than they actually are. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio as to how this may lay on your own wrist. And you can see there's still a lot of nice light play, whether it be the hands, you see the brushing there, you see this nice 20 millimeter bracelet. So the nice thing is with the 20 millimeter lugs, you could swap this out if you wanted. And this does have even a nice little taper down to 17.8 millimeters. So this looks good. This is clean. What do you think about it versus the Grand Seiko? Okay, yeah, it feels a little bit more grand. It's cost a couple more grand. But at the end of the day, something like this, a tool watch, some could even say that it's probably finished too nicely for a sporty tool watch. So maybe you might see that Zaratsu polishing and some of those extra details as being a little bit frivolous. And maybe you're not really feeling that. Me personally, of course, I appreciate it. I own this watch. I love it. It's a facet, a mainstay within my personal collection, that it does get heavy rotation. And I mean, it's gorgeous. You can see fine little details like the micro beveling along the edges of the bracelet. Of course, that's not something you're going to get on this more affordable take on it, but I think they do get a lot right here. So again, yeah, I'm impressed. WM, very nicely done. So with that said, let's go ahead, get it off the wrist, set it for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, guys, so let's get a little bit of Lume shot going. All right. So it does have, similar placement in terms of the Lume, similar shape, similar coverage. Of course, it's not going to be quite as bright. I mean, and it's tough to compete with Seiko's Lume Bright. And of course, when that is executed even on a Grand Seiko, with less mass and surface area, it's still executed at a very high level. Versus here, you're actually going to have, that's actually C3 that they're using. Let me give it a little boost there, just to keep it visible. It actually does do a nice job. Of course, it's just not going to be as thickly applied. One thing also to notice, a huge difference here is going to be the fact that one is a collar style GMT versus one is a flyer style GMT. Also, as you guys can see here, the light even plays a little bit differently. You can see much more of a dynamic dial, I would say, on the WM in terms of there being a very dark, mostly, for the majority of the dial, and then that blue strip can kind of light up. It can also wash out a bit versus here on the Grand Seiko. It's going to be a little bit more of a subtle blend. So you can see that blue is going to be a little bit more consistent in terms of being a bit of a midnight tone, and it's either going to be in the darkness or it's going to be kind of lit up there. But the actual surface of the dial, what it looks like is it's a little bit more glossy. So it's not going to have here the matted feature where this can actually be a little bit washed out depending on the lighting. Also, as you see the light gliding over some of the brushing, I'm sure you can notice some of those details are going to be not quite as, of course, competitive. But again, $143 watch versus a $5,800 watch. So those comparables aren't necessarily even meant to be that close. But guys, to really wrap this up, they're both great watches. Of course, I love my Grand Seiko. It's going to have a higher beat rate, and it's going to have a more desirable collar style GMT and everything like that. But also, it's a lot more expensive, and it's going to be thicker. It's going to be heavier. It does have a nice dual curved sapphire versus just a more simple flat sapphire you're going to find on the WM. It's water resistance, although equally rated, is going to be more confidence inspiring considering you're getting a screw down crown, and generally everything will be a little bit more confidence inspiring. You're going to get a longer power reserve with a 3-day power reserve of 72 hours versus a little bit shy of 2-day power reserve of 41 hours of power. And then again, smoother sweep with 4 hertz versus 3 hertz. So there are certain things there, of course, but there's some niceties when it comes to this WM, like the extra thinness at 12.2 millimeters thick versus about 14.5 millimeters thick. It even has a slightly shorter lug to lug of about 0.5 millimeters at 48 versus 48.5 on the Grand Seiko. So yeah, I mean, closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, they both wear very similar. The Grand Seiko SBGM245, of course, I'm loving that watch. It's a personal favorite of mine. And yes, the WM is not nearly as detailed or refined, but still well finished for a watch, especially under $150. So again, this is no knock on this watch that it's not as comparable execution wise. It really shouldn't be. So yeah, that's not too shabby. In terms of model variants, it's also available in a green dial, which the Grand Seiko also is, but it adds an extra dial by having a black dial option. So check the site links for current options and availability as well as pricing on the WM. I have to say this is the best WM I've reviewed thus far. And I've handled a few, and I actually even have another one in the queue just because it's a new brand. It's pretty interesting. I do try to keep things mixed up a bit, and as much as I can feature stuff that I like on the higher end, I like to make sure that I'm also featuring things that are on the more entry level side as well, just because not everybody is at that, in the same place in their journey in terms of collecting. Not everybody's into luxury products, let alone, niche, expensive, wristwatches. So in terms of comparable models, this watch significantly undercuts the Seiko 5 GMTs, right? Those SSK GMTs, the SKX style ones, and yeah, those don't have screw down crowns either. So, and they also are using a mineral, hardlex mineral, versus this is using a genuine sapphire with an inner AR coating. So, while this would probably have you know, higher specs, I think, you know, on paper than a Seiko 5, considering how much, you know, you're going to getting a solid milled clasp and everything like that. You know, some of the niceties you miss out on with Seiko 5. You know, you get those things here. You know, and the build quality is more comparable again to a Seiko 5. I will give a Seiko 5 the edge in terms of some of the finer details, but I'd say generally this is pretty close in terms of that comparable to a, you know, a Seiko 5 that's going to run closer to, you know, $400 or $500. This again, still, even versus the Seiko 5, this is an amazing deal, especially considering it's going to have pretty much the same movement, right? So bottom line for me, guys, this is the most impressive WM watch I've tested yet. And while no, I won't be selling off my Grand Seiko SBGM245 anytime soon, I really can't argue with the value proposition being offered here. It's pretty wild. It was almost scarily competitive in terms of the price point and what you're able to get, at least on paper. Yes, in the metal, there's going to be quite a big difference, but honestly, judging by a lot of the comments I get in other comparative videos, there is a certain level of drop off where people just find diminishing returns in higher levels of fit and finish, where, you know, especially on a tool watch that you're wanting to go have an adventure with, some people are going to prefer something that is going to be a bit more pedestrian in terms of its execution. So why pay extra for, you know, these little ornate details? But let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you aren't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.